Welcome to our first session. So I hope you are all awake and alive today, Monday morning. I know we have coffee and tea. So our first session will focus on the current state of disaster risk financing and anticipatory action in the Philippines. So together with our distinguished speakers, we will explore how risk-informed approaches shape preparedness and response strategies, ensuring that the resources reach the communities before the disasters strike. So we will together examine how far we've come and uncover opportunities to enhance our system further. So please, before we start the session, let me go through the format of our session for this morning. So each of our speakers, we have two speakers today for the first session. We will give them 20 minutes to share their insights, and then we shall allow 30 minutes after for the Q&A. So without further ado, perhaps I will introduce our speakers. First of all, our first speaker for today's session, Miss Maria Teresa Nina Abogada. No? We call her Nina. So Miss Nina is a leading expert in disaster risk financing and resilience building. She is the lead researcher for START Network's National Scoping Study on Disaster Risk Financing in the Philippines. So Nina's extensive experience spans gender justice, financial inclusion, disaster preparedness, and forecast-based financing, among others. So among her groundbreaking projects are the Be Ready initiative, the I-Afford, and the AsiaFin, all of which have gained recognition for innovation and impact. She also chaired the Start Ready governance team in the Philippines in 2003. Let's give her a round of applause, Ms. Nina Abogada.
Thank you, Rhoda. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can see me, but I need to stand behind the podium so I could keep myself on track through my notes. Welcome to session 1. Let me check this. Okay. So session 1 is, we'll be presenting the results of the National Scoping Study on Disaster Risk Financing. This session aims to explore the current state of DRF, or Disaster Risk Financing, in the Philippines, its challenges and opportunities for hopefully enhancing effective DRF coordination, particularly to support resilience building against climate and disaster risk. The session would also cover and would be presented in 3 parts. One would be the study design that guides the data collection and analysis process. The second would be presenting the key results and findings. And lastly, the presentation of stakeholder-led recommendations. Okay, very quick context before I start to present the result of the National Scoping Study. As we all know, Philippines endures disproportionate disaster impact than the rest of the world. In fact, according to World Risk Index this year, 2024, for 16 consecutive years, the Philippines ranked as the world's most disaster-prone country in the world. The country is highly exposed to an array of hydrometeorological and climate hazards, already accounting to 322 disasters in the past 20 years, affecting 168 million people, and have already accumulated damage around 1.60 trillion Philippine peso, or equivalent to 29.3 billion US dollars. in the past literatures, in 2017, an annual average of 1 to 1.7 or 2% of the GDP is consumed on disaster risk financing, but with this data alone, this already consumes 4% of the GDP. With the frequency and severity of disaster risk, in 2015, the Philippines have adopted the disaster risk financing strategy to strengthen fiscal resilience of the country against climate and disaster risk. But after a decade of implementation, while significant progress have actually been made, there are key challenges that confronts the strategy, particularly pointing to fragmented frameworks, bureaucratic delays in terms of the disbursement of funds, an issue also in adequacy of funding, the lack of accessibility of the DRF mechanism, and to highlight also the challenges experienced by the stakeholder, particularly on the lack of effective coordination. So to guide us with that overall context, START Network, one of our key stakeholders in disaster risk financing in the Philippines, and Arvin already provided a crash course in terms of what are the disaster risk financing facility, have actually supported this study with also the experience of the observation of challenges in terms of effective coordination in the country. So to gather insights in terms of the result of the disaster risk financing in the country, the study have actually employed mixed methods of data collection, particularly desk reviews and including gray literatures, which are rounded, I think, to 90 literatures that supported the study. And we've also conducted key informants interview, conducted stakeholder mapping and sense-making workshop. However, we would like to inform you that the study is not focused on the funding flows of DRF in the country or even evaluate its utilization. The study, like any other study, have actually faced key challenges in terms of data collection, primarily because surrounding around fragmented data, the absence of centralized DRF database actually complicates data collection and analysis process. And because the information are scattered across different various administrative levels, then it's a bit, tedious to consolidate, but we did try our best and effort to actually present and summarize the different documents that were gathered during the interview. Linked to this is the limited data accessibility. It was also a bit challenging to look for the spending and funding sources patterns because not all private and financing is actually available in one platform. There are several DRF initiatives and insights that are very rich. Unfortunately, some of them are not consistently shared or documented. And lastly, we were also informed by the experiences of the community stakeholders or individuals themselves. There's a bit of confusion with community members because they are also unaware if disaster risk financing is actually part of emergency responses or development programs. And lastly, of course, like any other studies, the scheduling of priorities have actually conflicted in terms of the schedule for key informant interview. And November, the typhoons have decided to come in a parade, like Dennis have mentioned in the last meeting. So the several activities related to the study were also affected by the extreme weather events. Before I start, I'd like to quickly ideally share with you the disaster risk financing framework in the Philippines while we are working on the slide. Let me just quickly run down what the disaster risk financing strategy. So it provides a grounding. Okay, thank you. So it provides a grounding for the study. So the DRF strategy, which is actually started to be developed in 2010 but was adopted in 2015, is a risk financing strategy of the Philippines to support different types and impacts of disaster hazards according to different financing instruments. In the Philippines, we have two mechanisms. One would be the ex ante, which is the financing before the disaster event. The second is the ex post, which is the financing after the event. These financial instruments are actually distributed in the different disaster DRM phases according to the risk hazards or impact, which scales from low frequency and high severity to high frequency and low frequency. And I will deep dive on this a bit later to explain how these were utilized and what were the key insights of the study. Okay. So given this, let me first share with you the first insight of the study related to the available legal instruments in the Philippines. We've attempted to organize and categorize this into 4 layers, particularly looking at the core policies and strategies that actually supported the RFI mechanism. The second would be auxiliary frameworks and guidelines to see how this is operationalized in the country. And third, which is I think very valuable for all the stakeholders here, is to be informed of the emerging policies and frameworks that would influence or guide the RFI. And lastly, just to ensure that we are also connected to regional and global agenda, we've also mapped them out. So let me begin with the first one. Just to summarize, by the way, the study was able to find 3, 4, 5, 7. These are not the new emergency hotlines, but these are the legal instruments that have the study found out. The first one is there are 3 core policies and strategies that guides this, the DRF governance in the country. I will not go into details. I will just run down all this because the narrative of report of the study provided a bit of description. The 2 fundamental core strategies actually the DRM Act and Climate Change Act. And this actually paved way to develop the RFI strategy, which was launched in 2015. If you know, the DRM was actually enacted in 2010 and Climate Change Act in 2009. The operationalization of these 2 laws to finance disaster and climate risks have supported the RFI. The auxiliary framework, which looks into NDRIM plan until 2023, also the utilization of LDRIM-F and the setting up of evacuation center as part of DRM was actually part of the guidelines and auxiliary framework. There are 8 regional agenda. I will not discuss them one by one, but just enough to say that these are the DRFI of the Philippines is actually anchored on the global agenda to finance climate and disaster risk. But I would like to specifically point you to emerging policies, frameworks, and guidelines. One would be the DSWD 2021 Shock Responsive and Social Protection Framework, which actually aims to integrate anticipatory action in social protection programs of the government. This is still under development. There are pilot programs being conducted, and I think it's good to be informed because the spaces to actually ensure the needs and context and voices of those affected would be included in the framework. The second would be House Bill or HB 9935, the Declaration of State of Imminent Disaster, which I think everyone of here is mostly familiar because this is where anticipatory action agenda is integrated. Then we also have House Bill 101-10422, the creation of the Department of Disaster Resilience, which is, by the way, has been consolidated, and there is now HB 13 to consolidate all of these bills to enhance the resolution. 2 main House Bill, and if you would like to know more, particularly on House Bill 2105, I see my good friend Dennis here. Maybe over a break you can discuss more. This is a very new resolution filed in the Congress just last month, which calls for a resolution declaring a disaster and climate emergency agenda. This bill particularly proposes for the government to declare a disaster and climate emergency, urging urgent actions from the government, LGUs, and stakeholders to address climate and disaster risks. It calls for strengthening preparedness through adaptation and mitigation measures integrated into development plans, and particularly mobilization of the proposed Disaster and Climate Emergency Fund to support anticipatory action, renewable energy, and disaster climate governance, among others. And lastly, there is also the proposal at the Senate sponsored by Senator Amy Marcos, or SB 2045, known as the Budget Modernization Act. This new bill proposes to highlight public financial management by providing stronger oversight to Congress to unify financial planning, budgeting, and performance management through participatory budgeting. I think we have heard on this in the previous administration. This is being revived on SB 2014, particularly looking at sections 11 and 13, because this would address a lot of the policy gaps on RA 10121, but particularly focused to enhance fund accessibility, streamline budgeting processes, and enhance accountability for timely disaster response. In terms of the available disaster risk financing instrument, which is the second part of the study, let us allow us to present to you all the list of disaster risk financing instruments. We have attempted to actually map them out, the current, the developing instruments that are available in the country to guide us to know what are the available instruments and what mechanisms could be actually tapped and utilized. So following the DRFI strategy, the instruments are actually mapped according to the two financial instruments, the ex ante and the ex post, and also placed according to how they are utilized in the country. Note that there are around 10 financial instruments in the Philippines currently. The ones that are shaded in neon green are all government managed, from National Disaster Management Fund, contingency funds, the agricultural fund, full catastrophe funds, and LDRIM-F are all government managed. The ones that are shaded in purple are what we call blended financing. This is a government fund infused with private sector financing that are mostly under development. The one that is shaded in light beige are still under development, particularly Global Shield facility, and also the joint catastrophe and property insurance. While these two are actually started consultation in the previous year, this is still under development, and products in terms of offering are still under pilot testing phase. Okay, I will not discuss where these were actually used, but the narrative report that would be out by next quarter of next year would be able to provide you all the lists where these instruments were used. What I want you to focus on is the benefits and challenges of the 10 instruments. These are particularly focused on their utilization, the feedback of the utilization, and at the same time, the opportunities where it could be actually strengthened. If you would look at the national and local catastrophe funds, these are actually available at the national level, currently being used by the government, but a lot of the challenges around this is the delayed of disbursement, inefficient funding, and actually according to audit reports, the poor monitoring, because we cannot identify where the allocations were spent in the different DRM phases. We have the contingency credit, both the CAT-DO, the catastrophe drop-down option, or the catastrophe bonds, which are actually aimed to be quickly disbursed and diversify risk. But unfortunately, these are all credit lines. So these are debts, to existing debts that the country have and have been only used by the national government. LGUs only utilizes LGRIM fund, but not this fund. We also have the risk fund pool, which is basically supported by most humanitarian and donor agencies that are used at the subnational and local level. This is actually a shared risk financing tool that is found out to be most cost efficient and enhances regional resilience, but unfortunately limited in terms of scale and faced several coordination challenges. We have the Agri-Pool Fund. This is an old financial tool supported by banks, cooperatives, and even NGOs. And then we also have the forecast-based financing, which I think many of are familiar, which is more flexible, pre-arranged, and grants-based, and doesn't need repayment, and we're financed based on predictable hazards. Unfortunately, similar to other instruments, this is limited in scale and have coordination challenges. And how these tools are actually, okay. And the last 5 actually tools, similar to the previous one, focuses more on the insurance mechanisms in the country. We have the parametric insurance supported by the World Bank to prioritize 25 most vulnerable provinces in the country. It is actually challenged by limited participation of many local government because these are only pilot program. This is basis risk, financing, and have experienced long disbursement delay, which I'll discuss a bit later on. We also have, as I mentioned, there are 2 types of insurance, which is more indemnity type, which are payouts based on according to actual losses. But this is developing a bit slowly and have limited scale. You have microinsurance available, supported by different microfinance institutions, but the low penetration and literacy of government on insurance have actually affected it, similar to parametric insurance. Then you have the Philippine Crop Insurance, and you also have the People Survival Fund, particularly supporting climate adaptation, but have actually high transaction costs to avail. To understand how these are used, we've also mapped out the role of the stakeholders and how within the whole ecosystem of DRF is that they'll be able to support, to access, to implement, and at the same time to monitor. So in the study, we have asked several stakeholders to what are the roles that they're performing in terms of disaster risk financing ecosystem. We have found out that there are key roles that the stakeholders are supporting or implementing. One would be supporting in terms of strategy formulation, financial technical assistance, capacity building, innovation, data collection, until monitoring and accountability. What I'd like to highlight on this slide is actually the different roles that each stakeholders have actually been performing. We've tried to categorize them according to sectors: the government, including LGUs, the development partners, which includes bank aid agencies, the CSOs and NGOs, which includes network organizations, INGOs, and even UN agencies, the academe, and the financial sector. Horizontally, you can see that there are common roles that all the stakeholders have been doing, particularly data collection and risk analysis. But as I mentioned, the challenge is that these are not centralized and is actually fragmented. And for a particular sector, the CSO and NGOs are actually performing most of the 8 roles that have been actually associated with key roles to support DRF financing. And to understand further how all the stakeholders are coordinating, we've attempted again to put some organization to a very complex coordination mechanism. We have tried to categorize them to 3 types according to the instruments, how the instruments were used. We have the cluster on climate finance and risk transfer, and also the DRM cluster and anticipatory action cluster. Note that these are implemented or available at different levels from national to local level. So the government, particularly as led by the Department of Finance, who oversees the implementation of the RFI strategy in the country, coordinates with NDRIMC through OCD being the government arm for NDRM. Actually discusses and looks at the governance in terms of the utilization of NDRIMF until local disaster risk management fund. And in terms of climate risk transfer and risk transfer mechanism, we have different mechanisms or coordination ongoing, such as the interagency group on sustainable finance, the Global Shield People Survival, and the implementation of parametric insurance. The emerging cluster on anticipatory action is actually convened at the technical working level. Both is represented by government and non-state actors. And those who also have the DSWD, shock responsive protection. We have several regional and local coordination mechanisms which is not connected in any way with the Technical Working Government Group or the other clusters. So these are all separated in terms of mechanisms, and there are separate discussions ongoing. Okay. So to summarize and to highlight just key findings of the study, we would like just to point you to the matrix on the state of the DRFI in the Philippines. When we try to map all the existing instruments, whether it is a legal or financial instrument, along with matching it with the existing collaboration platform, we found out that the coordination mechanism is the lowest in terms of the rating of the stakeholders, particularly challenged by the different observation and gaps on legal and financial instruments, particularly the two frameworks on climate DRM and Climate Change Act actually affects the operation because of the disjointed implementation of financing mechanisms for NDRIM-M and climate financing. And this affects actually disbursement of funds, which ranges from months to years of delay. The bureaucratic delays particularly affect the utilization, and most of the disaster risk funds are actually used for, at the local level, risk relief efforts, but at the national level, more on the recovery mechanisms. The low insurance penetration, particularly on ensuring public and social infrastructure, is not flying off, particularly with local government. This is one area I think that should be focused on. But more importantly, if you look at the disaster risk financing strategy, we are supposed to be providing insurance at the household level. Up to date, there are no particular insurance offering except for the traditional indemnity offering of pawn shops, or microfinance institution. Second would be the decentralized system, both monitoring the spending, tracking the resources, and the actual results affected how the stakeholders coordinate with each other. And this is so difficult because in the times of early action, anticipatory up to response and recovery, there are different datas and levels of mechanisms that you have to go to. And organizations being spread too thinly have actually to choose where to invest resources. And lastly, as we have seen, the different clusters of coordination mechanisms happening at the national, regional, and local level are too many. The complex environment and multiple coordination mechanisms are overlapping, and even the roles of the stakeholders, making coordination mechanisms a bit slower and complex to navigate. With that, we would like to end the study with 3 recommendations. We would like to focus on continuously investing, innovating disaster risk financing, particularly an investment on ex ante and risk financing mechanisms. As of now, the emergence of forecast-based financing is actually practiced in country, but ensuring public assets, livelihoods, and infrastructure is not yet available. The weak reception on insurance actually would affect and would outgain the development gains of the Philippines. We would also recommend, the study is also recommending to strengthen and harmonize the collaboration mechanism. The previous slide where all the mechanisms are happening are a bit fragmented. The study and the stakeholders actually recommended to streamline the process and to have a connection with each other so we would maximize the investment impact. And lastly, I think one of the most important part is to institutionalize a monitoring and evaluation mechanism from tracking finance, spending, and coordination to support building a more resilient climate and disaster society, but at the same time, in terms of ensuring that we benefit on all the existing financial instruments in the country. I hope that gives you an idea of next steps in terms of partnership collaboration to improve DRF in the Philippines. Thank you.
Dr. Berse serves as the Dean and a scientist at the National College of Public Administration and Governance at the University of the Philippines in Diliman. With a PhD in urban engineering and a master's in environmental studies from University of Tokyo, Dr. Berse has dedicated over 2 decades to advancing sustainable development, interlocal cooperation, crisis management, and climate resilience. For our next presentation, let us welcome Dr. Chris Berse.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rhoda. Okay, so what I'll be sharing today really would be some of the key outputs learning from the study that we did in the past few months. Primarily looking at doing a stock taking of the different AA activities in the country. No? Of course, we all know the context. I think I don't need to elaborate on the reason why we're doing this, because I think this is something that we know already. No? But I'd just like to highlight why we need to do a stock taking in a way, because number one, we all know that AA is happening, and given the fact that practically the risks that we're facing are evolving quite fast, no? Sometimes faster than we are planning. So we really have to strengthen our efforts in order to also address the issue of fragmentation in database management, information management, as well as in the actual implementation, as shared earlier by Nina. So what we did was we distributed a kind of an instrument to some of our to different international NGOs working on AA, and these are those who responded. Now, we received 17 responses from 11, representing 11 INGOs. So if you can see your organization there. And at the same time, we supplemented that also with a series of interviews with selected local implementation partners, including the Red Cross, St. Paul University, Accord, Coop, and so on, as you can see in the slide here. Okay, so what I will do is that I'll be presenting first the international perspective, or the ANGO perspective, and then later on we'll also have the local implementers perspective. First, from the international side, INGO side, these are the triggers as used by the different INGOs as basis for the hazard, for the triggers, no? For the predicted hazard magnitude. One is, well, majority would we be using rainfall and wind speed in it for as trigger. And that has been reported by most of the respondents. And about 4 respondents also were working on, 4 organizations were working on or using temperature as a basis for the magnitude of the hazard. And for the impact, the primary consideration is still the population, followed by the affected or expected to be impacted natural resource-based production areas, as well as the lifeline utilities, critical point facilities, and the urban use areas. No? As you can imagine, where these areas, no, the factors are already using are based on the SIDRA terminologies. Oops, I think I skipped one. Okay. Tama ba? And these are ayun, okay. The tools for determining the triggers, historical impact data, as well as the weather data coming from PAGASA. Some are also using the climate projections and the community-based risk assessment and the conflict risk analysis, no? Gender sensitive. The models used mostly were the ones by the Netherlands Red Cross, the 510 model, and followed by of course by PAGASA, and the others are using the different models, no? Depending on the particular hazard. And these are the modalities. As you can see, the most common would be the protection of productive assets and unconditional cash transfer. There's also, of course, the early warning bulletins and the different forms of in-kind assistance, evacuation support, early harvesting, and cash for work, no? And for the selecting of the modality, it's based on different methodologies, cost-benefit, or sometimes the household economic analysis or the cost-effectiveness analysis. A few cases, the organizations are also doing a multi-criteria decision analysis or in market evaluation. Mostly the basis would be based on, regardless of the method, the basis is generally on community consultation, and also based on an objective impact assessment. Okay, and in terms of geographic coverage, the INGOs who participated reported this number. The number of beneficiaries would range from 5,000 to as many as 500,000. And as you can see here on the map, the numbers in parentheses represent the number of INGOs working on AA in the area, in the region. No? For example, you can see that most of the region, the BARM has the highest number of actors working on AA, and followed by Region 13 and Region 8. No? And the darker the shade means the higher the number of beneficiaries. And as you can also see, there are certain regions in the country where there's no reported AA, at least from the programs of the INGO. So you can see, if you know the Philippine geography, you can already identify these missing areas here. Okay, and then there are three, in terms of pre-arranged financing, there are more or less two types: the donor contingent funding and using the existing budgetary instruments. And as you can see, about 35% of a good number of the organizations were using both, and the others were using either the donor contingent or budgetary instruments. This just to give you some idea in terms of the allocation. No? I think what we would like to, outside of the numbers, what I would like to point out here also is that it was quite difficult to determine the breakdown, whether or not the financing comes from or is used or intended for the build component of AA or for the activation, no? Because a lot of them actually did not differentiate or did not provide a breakdown of the allocation, whether it's meant just for the establishment of the AA mechanism or is it meant for the activation. But anyway, to give you some idea, these are the different figures. Mostly, of course, based on ongoing programs, no, of these different INGOs. Challenges, not yet. We have here for measuring quality and results. We have mostly usually the INGOs do a post distribution monitoring survey, and in some cases there's a focus group discussion or follow-up interview, being conducted. And at a much longer time frame, they do a kind of a historical data analysis after some period. In terms of feedback and complaint mechanisms, usually there are certain feedback forms provided to the beneficiaries, the partners. Community consultations also are possible, with the possibility as well of hotline or mobile communication for a few cases. Can we go back? I think. Okay. The challenges, of course, there's it goes without saying that there's the matter of funding limitations. Also, the lack of governmental and institutional support, primarily, given the fact that it is from the side of the government, it's not that easy really to mobilize resources also, to support AA, given the limited enabling policy. The INGOs also reported difficulties in localizing trigger mechanisms, primarily because, as we have said, they do it as much as possible in consultation with the communities, but then again, there's that issue of translating those triggers in a way that would be based on conditions on the ground. The other challenge should be more external in the way that they have looked at the, as you may know, the rapid intensification of typhoons in particular. That's something that we have experienced in the past, 4 or 5 years. It's not supposed to happen that often, but I think we have experienced it quite too frequently than necessary in the past few years. Talking about Typhoon Odette, Kiko, and a few others. And then the process of procurement within organizations. These are internal to the implementing, to the NGOs, especially also in relation to how they're translated into with the local implementing partners. So that's for the INGO perspective. And for the, can we go to for the local implementors, all the participating informants shared that they follow a top to bottom kind of workflow with the international counterparts overseeing the technical and financial setup, and the local partners doing the groundwork. And what they highlighted, at least by the local implementers, was the need for buy-in of through participation and collaboration of the community, both in the planning and execution of the AA, to raise a kind of an ownership, and to ensure that they'd be participating also, in the whole process, not just as beneficiaries. The local partners also underscored the need to integrate indigenous and local knowledge in the trigger mechanisms, in the thresholds and early warning systems to address specific community needs. um, the cash as modality, no, as you can, the cash distribution was the most common by all the, at least as perceived with the local implementers. And reaching GIDA areas remain a challenge, primarily because of emerging issues of security and logistics, especially in areas that are hotspots for conflict. No? The local implementers were not really that comfortable, especially since many of them would be carrying, cash, for instance, in the distribution. These were resolved in some cases through authorized representatives who were identified days prior to the cash assistance also. Other innovative solutions would include the partnering with financial service providers or using the ATM setup, no, or using the ATM cards in the areas. Other challenges reported by the local implementing partners would be the skill and knowledge and capacity of the LGUs. Again, it goes back to not just AA, but the whole, the whole gamut of doing DRM, particularly with respect to the risk assessment component. That's where the main challenge is coming from. The acceptance, this is more on the, from the side of local government units in particular, with respect to certain guidelines, in the absence of an enabling policy, there's this hesitation to, mobilize financial resources and even human resources. For some, in the absence, let's say, for example, of the declaration of a state of calamity or outside of the structure of the allowable expenses under the DBM, the joint DBM, the ILG circular on the utilization of the local DRM funds, particularly the mitigation fund. So the thinking is they would rather not, they could not, they are not that, or not too many LGUs are really open to utilizing, mobilizing their own resources for AA, to avoid, just to avoid, auditing problems later on. This was mentioned already, the difficulties with respect to also reaching out to GIDAs. Again, lack of volunteers or manpower on the side, particularly of the LGUs. You have seen this in the case of Bohol, for instance, where the previous volunteers were quite hesitant to participate in the AA process because their previous experience with another volunteering work, which had nothing to do with AA, but with the national government, the census survey, did not really turn out well for them. Like they were, they had to shell out their own money eventually, and they were unpaid for quite some time. So when the AA process was initiated, there was that lukewarm reception among the usual volunteers. So that's a bit of a challenge. The outdated list of beneficiaries, this is on the side of the ones being held by the side of the government and the non-government volunteers also. As you may know, in the Philippines, we don't really have a very good information system when it comes to the movement of people, or the list of residents, for instance, in an area. So there's that problem. And this one is the last one. I mentioned it earlier already about the difficulties when it comes to mobilization of goods and funds in light of certain security issues in conflict areas. Okay, I think that's it. Oh, there's one. There's I think this was shown earlier also by in the slide by Nina, the anticipatory action TWG cluster within the government. And you can see here, just to give you an idea, it's co-chaired by the DSWD and FAO, and with the OCD and FAO providing secretariat support. And within the PIDRA analyst group, you have the triggers group, you have the Anticipatory AA group, you have the policy financing and institutionalization group, and we have the learning and evidence group where START Network is a member. No? The whole idea is while we're still, of course, understandably lacking that enabling solid policy environment to do AA at the government level, we're trying to influence it through these different participatory mechanisms within the governmental structures. And of course, these are just some of the possibilities that we can possibly we can exploit. The proposal, a pending bill in both houses in Congress, the lower house, the House of Representatives and the Senate, which would entail regarding the declaration or the institutionalization of a new mechanism to trigger funding, the declaration of a state of imminent calamity. That's the thinking is that with this kind of declaration, that will give us an opportunity to mobilize resources outside of, even without the state of calamity. So for the recommendations, we would hope, one thing, of course, is we need to strengthen the AA efforts, primarily to greater coordination among the INGOs and local implementers, to provide for a clearer coordination of protocols and communication channels to avoid duplication and wastage of resources. There's also the need to mainstream AA at the policy level, and that would mean really one is to having this bill adopted, ratified at some point, to complement our as an amendment to RA 6713, or maybe as a new one, and also to raise public awareness, and lastly to empower local communities by incorporating indigenous knowledge and practices into the different models and triggers that we are using in the whole AA process. Finally, that's it. Thank you.
Tanong, pamangkot, pangutana. Ayan, meron. Thank you so much from our friends from... Good morning.
Hello, good morning po. I'm Jake Agna from Sideram Borongan. So I'm an LGU representative. So this is a question for both of the speakers. I know that regarding sa presentation on the enabling policy for AA, we're on the process. We're getting there, hopefully. Pero my question is, in other countries, meron bang AA na naka-anchor sa national policy nila? And maybe we can have that reference or that similar framework for Philippines.
Thank you so much. Wow. Very nice question. Siguro we'll have another one so that... another one. Wow, equally. Yan. Go ahead, Sir Dennis. Microphone. Huwag mo sagutin yung tanong, ha? Tanong.
Yes, pagagalitan ako ni Dean Berse. If we take a look at the study, there's a focus on disaster and humanitarian financing. Do you think we need to take a look at also the climate lens, meaning the climate finance framework to, rebalance?
For both of them then, sir? Okay. Wala na ba? Oh yan, pangatlo. So, the first one, any other models in terms of national legislation outside the Philippines? And second, what about climate lens in terms of financing? Go ahead, Anna.
Hello, good morning. I'm Anna from Code NGO. I would just like to ask, in the formation of the technical working group for AA, I noticed for governance, I noticed that there's no participation or membership of CSOs or civil society. So I'm wondering if there's a space for the civil society and the NGOs to be part of the technical working group. Thank you.
Okay. Ang question ay for both of them. Sayang, is FAO here? Wala. Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Nina.
First question regarding models or policies, that we can maybe take inspiration of. Actually, it's the other way around. Based on the mapping of policies, most of the countries are looking at the Philippines if how the AA bill would fly off, because that would be the model and benchmark. So this is the first attempt actually in countries to integrate AA in the national system or national law. Isahin ko na lang siguro, so fair responses. And then the second one would be, how do we integrate climate risk financing, because the current policies right now are more DRM focused. If you look at DRF's strategy, that's actually updated to include climate risk financing, and precisely the point of the study, though these have conceptual links in terms of DRR and climate financing, the operation is a different story, because the mechanisms were not actually designed to merge or to synchronize, but actually is separated. So the intent is there. The sustainable financing framework focuses on green and climate financing. The establishment of people's survival intends for climate adaptation. But again, that's actually one of the policy gaps. And I think with the new proposed bill on merging climate and disaster risk financing, hopefully would strengthen and connect, the two approaches and frameworks. And the last one is
Inclusion, participation, representation of local NGOs in the National AATWG.
I'm attempted to pass that to Dr. Christopher, but I think just looking at the study that we have conducted, one of the recommendations is actually to ensure the participation of CSO and network organizations, like START or the other organization at the regional national level, is being looked at to represent and to ensure that CSO, even community-based groups are part of this organization, so they have a voice in terms of policy discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina.
Yeah.
Dr. Berson.
Siguro just, I'll start from the last one. No? The one that I showed earlier in terms of membership, those are the co-chairs, more or less. So there can be still if I'm not mistaken, tama ba, Alvin, there's still a window for other actors to join the different subgroups. Yeah. So, yes po, okay po yun. No? I think you just need to approach if I'm not, that co-chairs, no? Kasama na yung START network. On the climate lens, I think it's implied in the discussions, no? Usually they would say that when you talk about disaster risk financing, it's already given that many of the disasters that we have under that are actually climate triggered. So I think that's. But of course, even in the actual document, we can also see the incorporation of the climate impacts. Now, when it comes to the national policy, yes, Nina is correct actually. Strange as it may sound, but we are actually the
pioneers, huh?
yeah, even the law that we have, RA 10121, when it was passed in 2010, it was the gold standard. It became, in a way, and the whole world is also looking into how we're gonna do this, because AA is primarily initiated by the humanitarian community, and what we're trying to do now is to sort of like introduce and institutionalize that same concept within not only within the policy, but within the operations of the government. And so, to answer your question, we don't have yet, as far as I can say, but but from the non-government side, there's already a lot of experiences that we can, to operationalize. The challenge is in the government side because you have to balance it also with issues related to accountability, transparency, and so on. Yeah.
Thank you, Nina and Dr. Bursay. One and wala na? Last na? Two. Ayan. So last two questions siguro from the plenary. Tatlo ba?
Pwede pa ho. Good
Go ahead,
morning. Yes, good morning. I'm
Please,
from Local Government Academy of the DILG. I would just like to ask our two speakers, considering based on your study and based on the experience, meron po ba kayong nakikita na more or less na magandang setup at the local government unit for an effective implementation of AA? Meaning that means, of course, it is a multi-stakeholder approach, pero meron po ba kayo based on your experience?
Thank you. Another one from that table.
Good morning po. Nico Pacle po, Assistant Professor from the Department of Geology of Caraga State University. And then I was quite surprised earlier than sa mapa niyo po, sir, that Caraga has really a good, I think, AA actions po, or participation po. So I would like to know po, sir, kasi as it stands, being in the ground, sir, and then as hazard specialist po, meaning we are the technical persons looking at the hazards po, we can still see some rooms for improvement regarding that matter. And then especially involving the technical people po. So I want to know, sir, from that perspective, given the good performance po of the Caraga region, yet we are still being impacted with a lot of damages of several hydrometeorological and geological disasters. What could the academe and the technical people can still contribute, especially within the Caraga region, since we are looking at earthquakes, tropical cyclones, sinkholes, several other disaster-related disasters in that area. So parang it was a surprise to me that we have good performance, but from my perspective, I think we have a lot still for rooms for improvement. So I would like to know what could be our role in that matter.
And the last one. Yeah, thank you. Microphone, please. Thank you.
Thank you. The question is for both speakers. I think I wanted to highlight how great both research are, because actually it shows that there's a lot of room to create evidence and to generate evidence, because we actually have a lot of good work going on, but the evidence making and evidence writing still has a lot of room to grow. So I wanted to ask, what are the opportunities that you're seeing there, and who are the key actors who should be generating these kinds of evidence?
Okay, sige, I'll start siguro. On the first question, because I think it's related to the second question. When it comes to, I think there has to be, right now, the best platform to, to anchor a work would still be the existing platforms. We have a quite functional LDRRM system at the local level. You have the LDRRM office, the council, and everything. So if anything, if we want to strengthen maybe, let's say, the involvement of the academe and involvement of the technical people, it has to be part of that setup. No? For instance, we all know in the council that there has to be representation, right? CSO representation. I'm not quite sure how that is being implemented in different areas, because I would imagine it varies across areas. But there should be a seat there for the academe in the local council. No? And the other one, of course, if necessary within that council, if you are to learn from the approach of the national, maybe within that there can be a group that can be dedicated to AA, for instance. And that's where you can possibly have a more robust interaction among those different people or organizations working on AA. No? But anchor it as part of the council, because the decision, ultimately the decision making at the local level would have to happen within the local DRM council. And the actual operations, of course, would be the local DRM office. Now, when it comes to the evidence, if there's one thing that we need to really improve on, would be the reporting mechanism. And of course, the knowledge sharing among the different organizations. Because right now, there's really no one system. And the risk is that, of course, in practice, we're also using different nomenclature, so there has to be that kind of, again, this is not just an AA problem. This is a problem of the whole DRM data architecture in the country and climate architecture in the country. No? But it has to start with that, because when we were doing, for instance, the study, as you can imagine, we were able to get like 17 responses from 11 organizations, but there could be more, right? It's not really exhaustive, and the difficulty is in, you know, verifying the different data that's provided. So, and we're just talking about the INGOs. If we include the feedback mechanism, for instance, from the local implementers and the beneficiaries, that's a different matter altogether. So, and it's tricky with AA, especially if we're doing monitoring and evaluation, because there's only a certain time frame where you could do the post, you know, the impact evaluation. Because let's say, for example, after 3 months or after, if it's longer, if it takes longer to do the evaluation, most likely the beneficiaries would have already forgotten what happened. And what would stick to their mind would be the response assistance that they received, no, from the government. So the whole thing gets mixed up with the AA and the response relief recovery work. And so if you want to sort of like determine the attribution, how really AA is making an impact, it becomes more challenging the longer, you know, after a certain period. So that's a main challenge. Yeah.
Thank you.
Siguro in addition na lang to particularly models inspiration of the local government. Most of these LGUs have actually benefited in terms of pilot programs that were supported to integrate AA. Across the literatures and experiences that we have seen, you can take a look at particularly Eastern Samar and the municipalities, 4 or 5 municipalities, but we've taken note that one of the pioneers that were able to integrate and adopt a local resolution in AA is Salcedo, and I think 4 or 5 more in Eastern Samar. You also have in Mindanao in terms of Cotabato, no? So those are more local municipal level. At the provincial level, the inspiration before even Eastern Samar is actually Albay on, you know, volcanic eruption preparation for typhoon. Eastern Samar is actually leading because they're able to consolidate it at the provincial level. They are on the process of integrating, having a resolution. I think what is very distinct in Eastern Samar is that they have set up anticipatory action team sitting in their disaster management council. At the regional level, we can take inspiration of what BARM is actually doing and leading, where they have mainstream, you know, AA in terms of their policies and processes, and they have actually used that in terms of activating in the last typhoons. Lastly, to answer the question in terms of who generates the evidence, I think that we should not only be asking who alone, but the roles and responsibility. If you look at the government side, you have NDRIMC is also tasked in terms of monitoring the operations. So I think by function, NDRIMC could also be generating these evidences and share it for public, you know, use. But there are parallel mechanisms and platform with INGOs, UN. You have the humanitarian clusters who also gather a lot of and very rich evidences. But I think what already Dr. Chris was saying is that there should be a unified platform for monitoring and sharing the results, because I think the duplication of different data collection is not only very exhausting, but actually is very limiting to move forward and focused and doesn't promote synergy and complementation. Because if you look at financing, particularly for either climate or disaster risk, I think it's becoming scarce, and the impacts of both climate and disaster risks are increasing. So we need to really ensure that we harmonize a platform and system where stakeholders would be able to be part of.
Thank you so much, Nina and Dr. Berse. Palakpakan po natin sila. Yung results, the final output ng mga researchers will be available naman. And for those of you who were able to catch up or were able to attend the session, no, the sharing session of the last DRF research led by Nina, there's also a brief summary of that. No? So let's stay tuned on the publication of the researches at let's delve more on AA and the DRF system in the Philippines. Marami pa yan, no? So let's join hands and celebrate what we have at the moment, pero marami pa ang natitira. Thank you so much. I'll turn you over to our overall facilitator, RV, and thank you so much, Dr. Berse. Thank you very much. Nina.